previous time I spoke from the stage, my talk was about the harm that believing in psychics can have on somebody's life, and many people's lives, in fact. So this is a somewhat complimentary talk. It addresses the question in a data-driven fashion of whether or not psychic claims of clairvoyance have any validity at all. It's called the Great Australian Psychic Prediction Project, and the project had the goal of gathering and reviewing enough data to be able to draw a valid conclusion as to whether individuals really do possess these clairvoyant abilities. It was created and managed by Richard Saunders, many people here will know him, former president of Australian Skeptics, and he produces the Skeptic Zone. I was a member of the team, and that's why you're going to get an entire perspective on this unique investigation today. So the project ran for about 12 years and was completed in late 2021. It consisted of the first collection and then analysis of almost 4,000 psychic or otherwise paranormal predictions made by 207 people in Australia claiming to have knowledge of future events in some way. Now, the majority of these people claim psychic powers, but the data also includes things that are predicted about the future from things like astrology and numerology and other paranormal means. But for simplicity, we've called them all psychics, and these are psychic predictions. So one requirement for a prediction to be included in this project was that it was published somewhere in Australian media over the time that we looked, and that was a 21-year period starting in the year 2000. And importantly, we didn't go into this as a debunking. And if the data shows that some psychics can do this, that's what you're going to be hearing about today. And we believe, in fact, this is the largest effort ever undertaken of this type. So first was the data collection. Over many years, with some help, Richard Saunders collected and archived predictions, starting with those that were available in print publications. This started with the Psychics Directory, and it was the first source mined, with magazines and other print sources used later, including documents stored at the State Library of New South Wales, State Library of Victoria, and then added Australian radio, TV, YouTube predictions that had been recorded that Richard could archive. And this was an extremely labor-intensive process on his time, thousands of hours, untold hours. Now, the next step, of course, would be scoring all of these predictions. Saunders realized it would take a large, sustained effort to do this. And he started in 2016 with a small team of Australian skeptics. They met in person. This was in the before time, when there was no problem doing that. And then Saunders continued the effort over many years, mostly on his own. In mid-2020, when the pandemic had locked everything down, especially in Australia, Richard reached out to Susan Gerbic in this audience, and she organized an international team of volunteers to complete that project, and I joined that project then. We met on weekly Zoom sessions run by Saunders for well over a year, researching, analyzing, and scoring every one of the predictions in the database. And it's important to note that we didn't divvy them up. We scored them all collectively and reached a consensus on every one of them. As we worked, the actual number of predictions in the database grew, because often a psychic will say A and B and C and D are all going to happen. And Richard had that as one stream, because it was a stream of consciousness, but we had to score each of them independently, and so the number of independent predictions actually grew as we worked. And the time spent by our team, this was a back-of-the-envelope calculation, something like 1,000 person hours, 42 person days to score all these predictions. So this is just one Zoom session snapshot. You might recognize some of those people that are in the audience. There was stand up if you're in that photo, or if you were one of the people on another session that wasn't in there, I'd like to have applause. Susan? I think Mr. Trammell is here. And the scoring categories, how did we give a result for each of these? Well, something was either correct, which was obvious, it was just wrong, but they're in the ambiguous categories. It was, oh, unknown, it was expected, or it was too vague, and I will get into what all those are. But first, let me give you the results. Surprisingly, the data showed that these people were unexpectedly good at predicting the future events. The vast majority of all the predictions were absolutely demonstrably correct. And they avoided making any predictions that were vague, expected, unfalsifiable, and they didn't miss any important historic events that were going to happen in the future either. So the evidence demonstrates that they are really psychic. I hear some scoffing here, and yes, you're right too. Be skeptical about that. Before I give you the actual results, let me tell you about the categories that we put things in, besides correct and wrong. So first is unknown. Some predictions were impractical or impossible to verify. These things happened about people's private lives. They were very far into the future. Things like that. There were about 80 of those in the database. And some examples, the financial investments of Sharon Stone are going to show good profits. By the way, every prediction I show, parenthetically, will have the psychic's name, and no, that's not a typo, and the year it was made for. So, like, how would you find this out without calling Sharon Stone and asking for contact information on her advisor? So it's unknown. This is about somebody who's going to make it to a certain age, and that's way in the future, so when we scored everything, it was unknown. The database has a lot of things about the royal family, since Australia is a commonwealth. There's one about William to outlive Kate. Again, that may happen or may not. We don't know yet. Then there's the category called expected. Many psychics make a large number of obvious predictions, and then they take credit partially for those being really a good prediction. Right? These are events that are likely or absolutely going to happen. We did not score these as correct, even if they did happen. And this significantly, we'll admit, reduced the percent scored correct. We absolutely thought that was justifiable. There were almost 600 of those in the database. Some examples. A young brown horse is going to win the horse race. Yeah. Large earthquakes are going to happen in parts of the world which always have earthquakes. Germany's going to have snow. So we mark those as expected, not correct, even though those all happen. Then there's too vague. This is another category psychics do this. Ambiguous predictions. There were 698, almost 700 in the database. So there's a lot of underhanded things that are going to reveal in politics and business. This person, I don't remember who it is going into a spiritual year. Oh, who will win the U.S. election? Numerology shows it could be either Trump or Biden. Now, if there was a prediction that said there was going to be insurrection, that would have been interesting, but no, that's not there. Then this is a gray area. I want to talk about coin flip predictions. Predictions with coin flip probabilities, we had to score either correct or wrong, and then we treated these equivalently to long shots. And this pushes the percent correct towards 50%, inflating the actual success rate of other kinds of predictions. Here's some examples. Two things where it was predicted where the odds, in fact, were 50-50 or just about 50-50, and we marked those as correct because they did happen. So what were the actual results? 11% of the predictions were scored correct. Just 11%. And this, I remind you, includes those coin flip predictions. Most predictions, almost 90, were unknown, just expected things to happen, very vague, and the absolute majority were just wrong. And this is it graphically. So the wrong, let me give you some examples of wrong ones. Sydney being hit by a huge earthquake. I don't think they'll ever catch Osama bin Laden. Somebody has to explain how the person thought this was reasonable. Anti-gravity to lift heavy objects is going to become a reality, and I'm still waiting for the Amazon Prime sale on a device that will help me move my furniture. So we'll look at one special subject of special interest, and apologies in advance. We're going to talk about number 45. Even though it's Australia, there were a lot of predictions about Trump. Only 11% were correct, and almost all of those were 50-50 odds. So we're too vague, expected, and 72% were just wrong. Some examples. Hillary was going to win in 2016. Donald Trump was going to make a great president. And these people really didn't know his personality. Donald Trump was going to resign out of the blue for no reason. He didn't leave the White House when he legally had to. So as important as the predictions that they got wrong were, we thought it was important to say what happened in history that they should have seen coming if these people think they're clairvoyant. And these people always ignore that they missed these things. Space Shuttle Columbia burning up on re-entry. We did 10 in each year, and we have a huge list, which is in the articles that we wrote, but I'm just giving you a quick sampling. The worst natural disaster in human history, except for Noah's flood, happened in 2004 with the tsunami. A horrible earthquake in Chile, the amazing thing that happened where tsunami triggered a nuclear disaster. Nobody saw that coming. Deadliest structural failure in a building happened in Bangladesh. The amazing, we still have Malaysian Airlines Flight 370. I still don't think they know what happened to that. The first known interstellar object passing through the solar system, somehow these people missed. The COVID-19 pandemic. Retroactively, some of them say they predicted it, but there was nothing clear about that. And being obsessed with the royal family, there were a lot of predictions about Queen Elizabeth II. There were 12 of them, and saying she would abdicate or die in a specific year, and not one had the right year. So it seems, in conclusion about that, these people were appallingly bad at predicting future events. And as Richard Saunders says, most of what was predicted did not happen, and most of what happened was not predicted. So So besides that, as I mentioned, these psychics tried to rate themselves. This is one of the people who's in the database a lot. Every year she puts her predictions up, and she puts a little check mark next to the one she thinks she got right. All but 2 on this page are right, and I want you to see the ones with the white arrows. That's the one we took exception with. They were either they were just expected, they're vague. But look at the last 2. She said that we're going to get free energy from space, and she's the person who predicted using anti-gravity to lift objects will become reality in 2001. She marked herself correct on that. So Richard Saunders summarized that the golden rule of predictions is make many predictions, make most of them vague, make a few precise ones, and you point out the ones that come true, and everyone will ignore all your wrong guesses. So we publicized the project. Adrian Hill, who was in the audience, was first out of the gate publicizing in The Skeptic. Richard Saunders gave a talk at Bay Area Skeptics and the Convention of the Australian Skeptics. He then published the final report in The Skeptic in late 2021. I published 2 articles on it, one in the online version and one in the print magazine. I was fortunate to have that translated into Spanish. And following the publication, Richard and also Tim Mendham, who is the executive officer of the Australian Skeptics, were interviewed all over media. And I contacted Seth Andrews to try to get some of it preaching outside the choir stuff. And he did an interview of Richard and myself on the Thinking Atheist podcast. So my closing thoughts are that the appalling record uncovered by analysis of this large set of predictions, combined with the failure to predict over 200 historic items in the time period we looked at, just is embarrassing, and these people should be embarrassed, but they're not. It's almost like none of these people, or perhaps no one, is actually psychic, right? But I'm going to say one last thing. As a card-carrying skeptic, I need to say, well, maybe, the person who's really psychic wasn't in our database, and so can't say for sure. But of course, this organization has a challenge, $250,000. All they have to do is sign up and prove it, put up or shut up. And this was the section of the report in the Australian Skeptic about the people who contributed to this project. And again, many of the people in this audience are listed there.